Today, Raul and I talk about how our video gaming past helps us to understand and spot issues in companies almost immediately. Sure, having seen now 100 to 200 revenue teams from the inside might also help us a little bit with that. We will go into how we break it down into elements and levels and what common pitfalls are for using this approach yourself. And then if you stick around until the end, we talk about how you can be a guest on the show also. Now, enjoy.
There are certain levels that you go through. And for these levels, there are requirements that you need to pass from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4 and so on and so forth. And the important analogy is not just, oh yeah, there's a logical steps to things. It's also that these parts of the journey make you ready for what is to come. So in that castle that you're building towards, there will be an enemy and you will need all the weapons that you have collected to get to slaying that enemy.
There's an order to things. It would make your life a lot easier when you start thinking about it in ways of levels. And say, okay, in order to progress with a CRM of this size, do my processes need to improve in order to actually achieve that, right? Does my data entry need to improve in order to achieve that? Are there other things that are dependent on one another?
You need to, for example, to get from where you are right now, within the next 6 months, to advance one step further in CRM, to advance one step further in your hiring, and to advance 2 steps further in your process risk, for example.
So, we ended the last show by me teasing a little bit that Raul and I wanted to talk about something serious here today. And I think we've been dropping hints here and there and everywhere. So I don't know, maybe some people are interested about what's going on here now.
I also really think this is an interesting topic in itself. So we'll be using today to talk about what we've been working on, how you can work with us. But I think more importantly, for even if you're not among that group of people, the learnings that we made and a model that we use to arrive at the conclusion, which might be really helpful for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And really kind of all of this started by us thinking, okay, we've been now doing this show. I mean, previously, obviously, Mikkel, and maybe we're going to have Mikkel on the show actually at some point to kind of interview him. But previously, Raul and I did the Revenue Brothers, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been actually working on this for a while, right? And I think one of the thoughts we've been, playing around with was like, okay, cool. How can we add more to this, right? We're giving, I feel, great advice, and people tell us that it is good advice. But how can we amp that even more, right? And I think talking to some folks, like I didn't do any interviews, but like loosely chatting about this, what I heard here and there was like, oh, your advice on the revenue formula is really great, but my issue is different. I'm a snowflake. I have different needs. You're talking about this thing for this enterprise thing, but actually I needed this for my SMB thing. Or you talk about these guys about 20 million. I need this for 5 million, et cetera, right? Kind of to a degree, taking some of the advice we're talking about and our guests are talking about and breaking this down and applying that was still pretty difficult, right? At least that was some of the feedback I've been hearing. Did you hear something? What did you hear, Raul? What triggered you to think about what we could do next?
So this would be a great point to say something like, many people have asked me this and then the other, and that's BS. That's not true. Like, we're not getting a request every single day on helping people. That's not what happens. But what happens is some people talk to us, and we talk to people we're already working with, we're already talking to. And there's this kind of, this bulk of ideas that all gather around the same idea, which is, okay, cool. How do you now get to me being an actually better company, making more money through this advice, right? And obviously advice alone is not enough, right? It's maybe interesting to you. Maybe you listen to this on your car drive or in the office when you're trying to take some time away off the day. But that's not ultimately in its own making it better. And so the idea that we had is, okay, how can we get all the projects we've done in the past, at this point over 400 projects, all the ideas and the execution we've also executed ourselves, to be of help for real value for people. No BS. Yeah. We hate BS. Maybe you've seen at this point. No thinking about how to charge maximum hours and how to stick in there and just extract the life out of people. But what is something that we would have used ourselves and would have been actually helpful for us to make us better and faster. And that's what we're talking about today.
And I think the obvious things, to your point, is like, hey, let's build an agency, a growth agency, that's charged by the hour. Let's leave people with some slides and basically be done with this, right? And I think this is where you and I, Raul, we're kind of thinking a little bit differently. I think we have very strong roots in being the operators, being on the receiving end of help, being very reluctant to, in my case, I've been very reluctant to kind of receiving and accepting help simply because I was always feeling, either it was really not tangible what came out of the advice, or just took too long, like month and month of, back and forth and what have you, or was some cookie cutter stuff that, to a degree, you can call it BS or not, but simply wasn't fit enough for me to really actually take it and run to the next level, so to speak, right? And as we were talking about this, saying like those things are that we hate, we're basically creating the limitations of how we want to help people. So instead of kind of going into a long spiel, Raul, what's the glimpse on what we're doing?
The idea is you get maximum value, meaning actual executable advice to go to market excellence within 14 days. And no bullshit, nothing that comes off the rack, just tailor-made for you, specific to your situation, giving you what good looks like for your company at the time.
And everyone is going to be like, oh, wait a minute, in 14 days, no cookie cutter stuff, how's that going to work out, right? Kind of that's what everyone would be thinking. And we were like, no, that's actually pretty clear to us, right? So let's maybe talk about what we refer to, and we've teased this a little bit in a previous episode, what we've referred to as elements and levels, right? Let's talk about this. And if you're listening to this like levels, well, it sounds like a video game. Yeah, yes. Raul and I have a little bit of a video game past. I think many of the folks listening probably do have the same. Leveling up and progressing through things. I think that makes intuitive sense to us. So that's why we're actually using this way of decoding where companies are and how they work. But before we go deeper on the level piece, actually kind of the first one, really important, elements. Raul, when you and you did come up with that, but how does this elements thing work? How should people conceptualize that?
Maybe just as a quick side note, because I think it's a funny one, just to prove how much of gamers we are, despite the fact that I'm playing in the World Cup of Magic the Gathering next month, by the way, again, next time in Atlanta. Initially, the first podcast Toni and me did was called Super Revenue Brothers. And some of you might even know that. And there was a Super Mario theme, and the jingle before was also gaming themed. And we were a little bit fearful of Nintendo copyright strikes, so I think that's why we kind of went away from that. But we really are serious about this kind of gaming thing, but we're also serious business people, right?
But also, and few people know this, it's not like it was professional, but I was playing video games in my past and got paid for it. Like,
oh, really?
Played Warcraft 3, which is like a real-time strategy game. Like, this is now, it feels like it's 20 years ago, which it probably is, maybe even more than that by now. But just FYI, so we're not joking around when we're saying there's a gameplay connection here.
So what's the connection, right? In a game, let's say an RPG, which is a role-playing game, but any other kind of game, even if you're non-gamer, you will understand this concept. There are certain levels that you go through. And for these levels, there are requirements that you need to pass from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4 and so on and so forth. So if you're, I don't know, maybe not Super Mario, but like Zelda or whatever, playing that, to get to the castle, you need to find the key. To find the key, you need to find the fire sword. To find the fire sword, you need to do this and that and the other adventure first, right? So there are things that build on top of each other, enabling you and making you ready for the next thing that is happening. And the important analogy is not just, oh yeah, there's a logical steps to things. It's also that these parts of the journey make you ready for what is to come. So in that castle that you're building towards, there will be an enemy, and you will need all the weapons that you have collected to get to slaying that enemy. And then comes the next enemy, and that enemy will need the stuff that happens in between. So away from gaming, how does that look like now for business and go-to-market? There are, and this is the obvious part, there are the elements of your go-to-market strategy, right? There's number one, strategy. You will have heard about this. There's the people, there's the process, tech, and the data. These are the 5 elements that make up your company or your go-to-market strategy. You can double click on them, and then there's many more. If you're missing a certain word there, there's more coming, right? What's important for the execution is that there are certain levels that each of these progresses in. And the important part for you is that you don't need to be at the max level at every single point, but you need to, for example, to get from where you are right now within the next 6 months to advance 1 step further in CRM, to advance 1 step further in your hiring, and to advance 2 steps further in your process risk, for example. But also, for example, work on marketing, work on your interconnections with other departments, right? These are the double-click elements that we were talking about. And that's the challenge, right? The challenge is finding the right point that you should be aiming at, not overshooting, right? Because that's wasted time that maybe you don't have early on, and then executing towards those.
And I think this is how we are able to actually jump in, help assess, understand your current situation, and help and tell you exactly kind of where to go from here, right? Like a little bit more later on, but that's really how we're overcoming this. Well, how can you give non-cookie cutter advice in like this short amount of time, right? Kind of that's our unlock. And we've been doing this, I don't know, Raul, what you've been like doing 100, 200 projects or something like this. I've with Growblocks myself seen like 20, 30 different organizations from the inside. Like, I think that's the superpower here, right? But let's make this all a bit more tangible. Let's go through 2 or 3 examples. Let's see where we land. Let's jump into it. Kind of, what is a good example for people to understand that there are levels to things?
Yeah. And so I think this will be interesting for you in general, even if you work with us or not, right? Very typical example is there's this saying that you should hire the right person in sales at the right time. There's a time to hire a VP. There's a time to hire a C-level. There's a time to hire executors, and then military people and all that kind of stuff, right? There's all kinds of advice. If you read Ben Horowitz, then you maybe know what I'm talking about. What matters is, how do you approach this topic, and how do you answer that question for yourself? And one way that I did this once for a company that really helped them is, look, there's these levels, for example, when it comes to processes. And I like to think in 5 levels, but whatever. It's not as important yet what these exactly are, but let's call it from very little maturity to high maturity process, full automation, whatever. There's kind of a steps in between. And then there's also the different seniorities that you can hire. What is important is to look at where you should be in now. Maybe you're lagging behind, so that's why where you should be now, and where you want to be in 3 months and 6 months and so on and so forth. The idea with hiring is that many times a certain person, but also a certain kind of person, a certain seniority, is fit for a certain stage because they're good at getting you from where you are right now or where you should be, getting you there, to the next one. Concrete example, maybe a VP sales is actually the person to get you from level 3 in processes to level 5, right? And that's maybe a 2-year span, where you will go from, okay, we kind of have a little bit of a scalability in processes to now we're fully automated and we can have this 200 people machine there. But maybe at the point where you're in right now, you need to get to level 1 even at first, which is get it from the founder's brain onto paper, onto some semblance of a CRM, and onto some kind of repeatability, which maybe that's not what a VP is for, right? And that's when you get the scrappy person who can do all kinds of different things and is ready to build a quick CRM in a day or 2, and then enable that with a little bit of clay and get some automations in there just as a first version. So the link here is that the level that you're at and the transition that you need to make within the now, but also within the next couple of months and years maybe, is a good North Star for the kind of person that you should hire. And each of them covers certain ground. And this is true on seniority, but then again, also, of course, on individuals. You will sometimes find VPs who are scrappy enough to be early stage, but also corporate enough to do later stage. And that's kind of a gem that you found there. But typically, that's kind of how hiring works there.
The hiring advice on VP of sales, and we discussed this previously, that I usually see is, oh, you want to, 5 million, want to have this kind of guy, at 10 million, you want to have that kind of lady, at 20 million, you want to have this, right? And to a degree, this is a way to express the same idea, but like in a little bit of a clunky way, right? So what I've seen many, many times, myself, I made this mistake myself, by the way, had, US team hired a VP sales, had to fire him within, 3 weeks or something like that, simply by getting the levels wrong. I went for the really cool, nice logo, big company steps in, and then we realized, oh, wow, none of the things that he needed were in place, like none of them. And the thing is, like, they usually haven't learned how to put these things into place when they're coming from like a, think about a Salesforce or something like this. And so they can actually not get you from level 2 to level 3 or wherever they can actually dock in and be successful, right? So in that case, fantastic guy, fantastic CV, did all the right things, blah, 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 nice guy as well. But simply, we were not yet far enough progressed for having him, for actually utilizing him, right? And the alternative would have been to try and hire like an ops person that can help us to then get there, but it would have taken another 1 or 2 years to then actually use the VP sales in the right way. And we just decided, you know what, actually this doesn't work out. We kind of hired the wrong guy for the job, and then, went back to the drawing board and hired someone specifically, we didn't call it level fit back then, but specifically fit for that situation, right? And I think this happens more than people think, right? Basically overhiring or not hiring someone that actually can take you from where you are today to where you need to go, right? And I think one of these issues that at least I myself had back then, I was, since then was talking to someone about, planning and those roadmap stuff and so forth. And he gave me an analogy that now clicks for me like extremely well. He was saying like, well, Toni, if you want to climb Mount Everest, you first need to know where you are. Like, are you at the bottom before you even hit, the mountain itself? Like, there's a long trek to even get to Mount. I haven't been, unfortunately, yet, but there's a long trek to even get to the mountain. And then there is, a couple of 1,000 meters up. Then there's, base camp, and then there's like different steps in between. Like, where are you, right? That's like step number 1, figuring out, are you at base camp or not, right? And then from there, where do you need to go and how do you progress? Kind of that seems intuitively sometimes easy, but you have to know these things before you can make the next decision there, right? And kind of in that level of thinking about it, I think was just not super clear to me back then.
And if you're thinking, well, yeah, I've heard that advice before, this doesn't really help me. So specifically the differentiation here is, this is not just telling you at 5 million you need that and 10 million you need that. These are just proxies where I think the levels help you understand what actually is underlying these decisions, right? And these strategic hirings and these moving ahead. It is much more helpful to you to know that if we want to move from level 2 in CRM to level 4, this is the kind of person we need. If we want to move from level 1 to level 3 in processes, which we will need to make within the next 6 months. So you have this roadmap ahead of the things that you need and the moves that you need to make. That is the kind of profile we're looking for. Because these levels, they can happen at 5 million ARR. They can also happen earlier. They can also happen later. And that is your specific situation. No two situations are ever the same. In this sense, saying something as, yes, we're special, is actually true, right? And if the investor tells you, oh, at 10 million, you need that person, at 1 million, you need that person, they're trying to be helpful. And in a way, they're telling you the same thing, but just on a level that is maybe not actually helpful to you and your specific situation applicable, right?
I just wanted to interject here. So one thing that you just said there is like, actually really resonated with me, which is I think people make fun of the fact that everyone thinks they're special. I just did this in the intro, right? I was like, oh, everyone is a snowflake. Snowflake already is a passive aggressive, throwing shade kind of thing. And I think what, this in reality is like, no, companies are not all super different. I don't think that's the case, but your current situation is very different from the situation of the advice that you've been getting, right? So I talked to one listener the other day, and he was in an SMB company previously, and he listened to all the SMB advice we had to give, and he skipped all the mid-market enterprise advice. And now he's running an enterprise business, and now he's kind of going back listening to that stuff. And that idea here really is, well, it needs to be situationally dependent. And I think in this situation is the snowflake, if you know what I mean, right? Kind of in the actual situation that you're facing right now, that's where the uniqueness actually comes in. But let's kind of jump to the next example that we've kind of lined up, which is really about, the typical process CRM stuff. But we wanted to kind of tell it in one or two stories that I think make sense to people, and not in a RevOpsy way. But maybe you take it from your role.
A very common one. And again, this is much more relevant than you might think, even from your vantage point as a founder. So this is not just one story, and there's not one person that's singled out here, but I have worked with many companies where I've had to do a CRM introduction, for example, or I had to introduce some kind of process. And what typically happened there was that the person who gave me the job to do, typically a sales leader, a CRO, founder, whatever, they were underestimating how much work had to be done to get to that level. And so a very practical example, this has actually happened to me exactly that way, is I go to a company, they want this big CRM implementation. And I talk to the head of sales, head of inside sales, and the head of inside sales tells me exactly about the process that they have. And they show it to me on a map, on a slide, and they tell me this is exactly what the process is. Everyone's following that. And I'm already a little bit wary here, because typically that's not how it exactly happens. And they say, we don't really need to work on processes. We don't really need you to understand all that stuff. Just go ahead and build this. This is what I want, right? I'm like, okay, cool. Let me just go to lunch with your team. Let me just go to lunch with the inside sales team. And talking to them, just two salespeople, what happens is not just that they tell me they never saw that slide or they barely remember it, and not just that they work differently from what their boss told me that they work like, but also that they have completely different processes from each other, including just the basic understanding of what things meant. What is a closed won? What is a lead? And what is an SQL? And how do we actually move these things forward? But also things such as, when do I enter it into Salesforce? When do I get the data from Clay? And everything that comes with that. So talking to three people, one of which was the leader and would have sworn on their firstborn child that there was just one process. Talking to just three people, it was already clear that there was three different processes. And so what turned out, what started to be a CRM project where they were thinking, oh, we need to move one level ahead in CRM, actually was interdependent with other things, in this case, processes. The people, educating the team, getting that level right first.
And the thing is, right, we can't really here drop the specific names of the companies, but Raul was working for Project A previously. You can just go on the website, look at some of the really big companies that they have, very proud of right now. It's one of those, or actually several of those where that example came from. So super, super relevant.
We're talking unicorn territory.
No,
this is not an early stage startup. You're talking unicorn territory startup at that stage already.
I mean, I can just echo some of this, right? This is my own experience. We wanted to roll out SalesLoft. Like now this even sounds like ancient history, talking about SalesLoft. Who's that? But basically, we wanted to roll out SalesLoft sequencer. We had around 100 SDRs or something like that. And we're like, oh, cool. Now that we're rolling this out, this will be so easy. What we then discovered is, and we were priding ourselves in our operational efficiency and how good we are and how strong we are. Maybe another item on like self-assessment sucks. But what we basically discovered was we bought SalesLoft, we started to roll it out, and we realized that out of the 10 different teams we had, we probably had 12 different processes that were followed. and who gives a shit that, you follow, 12 different processes kind of. Well, the problem was we couldn't roll out the tool. We couldn't get all the gains that we wanted to have. It took us 3 months to clean up everything. And cleaning up something when you're 100 people, this was not easy. Everyone had their little pet peeves of how they wanted to do things or not do things. And Once we got to the point of doing this, actually, we were like, oh, wow, now we have, performance management that actually works out across the company. Now we can tweak a couple of steps here and see, oh, now actually suddenly our reply rates kind of increase, et cetera, right? So once you make it into a process, you can start to change and improve things. If you don't have that, you can't do anything, right? So that's kind of my experience from this this angle of the story that you just mentioned there.
And this is very common. And I would venture to say that 75-80% of the times when tool implementations fail, such as Salesforce, Salesloft, even if you're using that anymore, Outreach, whatever, the failures typically don't come from the tool. They come because of these kinds of reasons. Typically, that's a great point where people just go in and blame the tool, and it's like, oh, Salesforce sucks. It's too complicated. It's too that. Well, no, you suck, right? Your company's processes suck, and your team, not in general, but regarding the processes, is just not ready yet. And that is why any tool would have failed achieving, for example, your next level of dashboards that you need, your next level of processes and automation. You're not going to get there with any tool unless you do your homework. And what happens is some companies go through this never-ending loop of going from tool to tool to tool. I've worked with companies where that was their third attempt at building Salesforce, which blows my mind. And they still were making the same mistakes.
I think the point here in the story really is there's an order to things, and you would make your life a lot easier when you start thinking about it in ways of levels, right? And say, okay, in order to progress with a CRM of this size, like maybe you're doing this pipeline to Salesforce jump or something like this, do my processes need to improve in order to actually achieve that, right? Does my data entry need to improve in order to achieve that? Are there other things that are dependent on one another, right? And enough of tools, but really kind of that level thinking is really important. And I think if I have any other advice here for you, is really the realization that to a degree, whoever is doing the assessment, very likely inside of your organization is probably going to get it wrong. There's a little bit, we're always talking about RevOps being the, the neutral person in the room and so forth, right? But you know what? That's not true for the own setup. Whatever you're doing, like in that case, basically self-preservation bias kicks in, and you will kind of assess things in a different way. Like we talked about hiring and people, like your HR leader, people leader, self-preservation kicks in when you talk about, the maturity of the where they are and the level that they are and so forth, right? You will just be biased, and also founders are biased. And hey, how strong are we in our sales maturity? Why? And this is maybe another topic to squeeze in here since we're landing there. But this typical founder-led sales transition. Again, we talked about this, I think, another time. This is not only important for people that are just getting started with $1 million. This is also important for people that basically have issues around 10, 20, 30, 50 million. But the realization there is like, well, I'm doing those sales. Why isn't, this AE that I hired, it must be him that is bad. But in actuality, the sales motion was simply not mature enough. The levels weren't progressed enough for this to actually work out, right? Raul, kind of, you see it sometimes from a different angle, but that is another way, again, to look at this problem and say like, well, actually on a level perspective, did we actually, set everything up in a way where this could work out or not? And many, many times people get it wrong. And using this way of thinking about it, I think will help you to get it right next time.
I've heard dozens of times this exact story. And this is really not an exaggeration. It was dozens of times. Some version of this. I've done 500K so far, 1 million so far, basically on my own as a founder. I now hired 3 salespeople, or 2 or 1. How can it be that we're still only at 500K? Shouldn't be possible, right? And I'm not even an educated salesperson. Well, it's almost always because you weren't ready for that person, or you weren't ready to make a hire like that yet. And the way I flip that is because the founder then almost always is like, okay, we hired the wrong person. We made mistakes. That guy sucked. She was not good enough. He was not the right fit, right? Okay, cool. Maybe that is true, but how about you hired that person? And you, not just you as a person, but your whatever HR department, whatever is part of that process, produces these kinds of hires right now. That is what happens. And that is why the first person you hired came out the way, and the second person the third way, and that's why they didn't have success. So the whole machine just typically right now spits out maybe the wrong person or maybe the right person at the wrong time with the wrong process and all that stuff. And so you better level up your hiring. You better level up the understanding of who you're looking for. Maybe you need to move away from, we have these 7-step interviews where all the founders talk to them, and after that, all the assessment we have about a person is, yeah, she was cool, I think she could be a great fit, or he's a killer, we need to hire him, right? And that's, I mean, I'm belittling this a little bit, but that is how very often it is done, right?
Yeah.
And you need to build a process where there's 5 people who don't all ask the same questions and who have actual things they assess against. And if you build that machine, then maybe once you hire those people and they come in, you need to have an onboarding ready so they can hit the ground running. And you don't get 6 months of waiting time until they're successful, but maybe 3 or 4, and so on and so forth. And then you can make it so you can actually build a machine that works.
And I think one last example here is really, let's take we're a mid-market company and we want to sell to enterprise, right? That is a very typical progression companies want to make, because better net retention rates, bigger deals, bigger logos, and so forth. And the issue here is really thinking through levels about, are we ready for something yet, right? Thinking about it from not necessarily our sales process, but the maturity of and seniority of our salespeople. Do we have the top funnel to support that? Do we have the product to support that? Do we have all the SOC to paperwork to support that? Can we actually, service them in the right way? Do we have the right rollout process in place and the team in place in order to support these? Do we have the right process in place in order to upsell them? Do we have the right messaging in place? Do we understand that we're not, instead of talking to a VP in a mid-market company, talking to a VP in an enterprise company, it's two completely different worlds. They not only drive completely different cars and have much, much more salary difference than you might think, but also the way they think about the business and their objectives in the business are completely different, right? And thinking through those levels will actually help you not to mess it up, which basically everyone is doing, right? Basically everyone is messing up the enterprise go-to-market. But this is just another example of how to apply those elements and then levels in conjunction of that. We touched on some of those areas just now, but I think we're across the board seeing 3 main topics emerge. One is people usually get this self-assessment wrong. Sometimes we say like self-assessment sucks, and simply because of the way we talked about self-preservation to a degree, right? So again, if I'm the founder talking about my own business, I will have a completely different sense of what's good, what's bad, versus me, the same person, looking at the same business, but from the outside, right? And I think that is true for founders, it's true for CROs, it's true for marketing leaders, the whole thing basically, right? So self-assessment is really difficult, to begin with. And that leads to the second problem, which is trying to understand what does good look like for right now? Because you can do, multiple different mistakes here. One is simply not knowing what good looks like for you in this specific situation. One of the folks I've been talking to basically said like, hey, Toni, I know what zero looks like and I know what excellency looks like because I worked in a big company, but in between it's a bit of a jungle, right? It's really difficult to figure out where am I over-engineered or where I'm undersupplied. I just don't know actually, right? Kind of really figuring this out is difficult. But if you combine this with the first one of your self-assessment being wrong, you might actually be thinking you're way further progressed in some area than you actually are, and therefore think it's not a problem, right? Kind of those two things kind of interplay. And then the last thing is really, and I think that's true for CROs, it's true for founders, it's true for RevOps, it's true for like everyone out there. It's not like people don't have anything to do. Like people are already extremely crazily busy. I think the difference is instead of adding stuff to the list, I think having someone help you with that self-assessment, with the where should you be, figure out what are actually better priorities than what you have right now in order to move the needle. And figuring this out is not only really difficult because you need to combine a bunch of these other things, but also you need to have confidence in what of the things actually will work out, right? Pushing then suddenly a big project out. Let's just say you're the CRO and you want to push a big project out based on the priorities that you settled on. If you don't have super strong confidence in this being right, it's gonna be just difficult, right? And I think that is the other piece, right? And again, this is commercial founders, it's CROs, it's everything in this. It's really what's your confidence level that the priorities you've set are actually the right ones, and then bridging that to the execution itself, right? Kind of that's when we look at some of those things, those are really where we feel the non-obvious parts of why this feels so difficult, why it feels so obvious on the surface, but why it feels still so difficult below, where this kind of hits, right? And then this is in this mesh of poor self-assessment, not understanding where you are right now, not having confidence on your priorities, and then therefore execution is kind of falling apart, right? Kind of that's the fur ball that we're usually seeing that people get stuck at mentally.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we've built. So we have a solution for that. And obviously a big part of the solution will be you just running like crazy and executing this. But what we want to help you is give you that compass, give you the mirror, or in other words, assess you correctly. And as a solution, by the way, also making you better for future self-assessments as a first thing, right? Then we will work with you on exactly what good looks right like for you right now and within the next couple of months. And then we will put that into an execution plan that you can actually realistically achieve and start that off with momentum all within 14 days.
What that gives me as a leader, as a CRO, as a founder, is a very simple roadmap that I can focus on and concentrate on in doing what I am doing best, which is execution. I'm great at execution. I think everyone listening is great at execution. I think the sequence of events and why and how is sometimes the difficult part to figure this out, right? And attaching that to where you are really and not where you think you are, I think that makes all the difference in turning this from some, BS cookie cutter slide deck to real revenue, real growth, real execution happening on the back end of that. So we are fucking excited about this. I hope you're too. The first 3 folks that are signing up on the website, what's the website? refformula.io.
Yeah.
We will select one of them to be on the show, maybe do a case with them, ideally do a case with them and see how much we can talk about it. And we're very much looking forward to kicking this next, chapter of the revenue formula off together with you.
Very excited. And again, be among the first 3 if you want to be on the show. But in general, hit us up and let's first discuss what this might look like for you or if it's a fit at all. If it's not, we will tell you.
Yeah. Thanks a bunch, Raul. And thanks everyone else for listening. And see you next week. Cheers.
See you.
Next week, we're talking about a concept you should be getting familiar with ASAP. Zero Waste GTM. You haven't heard about this yet? Well, you should change that. We talk about what it is, why it matters, and how you can execute to get there. If you don't want to miss it, hit subscribe and see you next week.